Okay, we're going to get moving here. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for attending the webinar that we're going to be doing today called Understanding Options in the Process of a Map Change. Now, this is specific, some of the information and a lot of it is specific to the town of Marshfield, Massachusetts, as we go through a map change in the community. But all of the insurance information as we get towards the end of the presentation today is relevant no matter what the map change is. So as we go through today's presentation, keep in mind that while the beginning part is more specific to the town of Marshfield, as we get through and towards the end, it will be very generalized and able to be used no matter what the map change is that you may be going through. As you can see on the home screen here on the presentation as you're seeing it, your presenter today is myself, Joe Rossi, along with the many different things that I do. As you'll see in a moment, I'm Chair and Executive Director of the Massachusetts Coastal Coalition. And we'll be reiterating this many times today. Become a member of the MCC. Become a member today. Membership is free on our website, and it gives you access not only to the different benefits that we offer, but we're going to be expanding those over the course of this year. So become a member and be able to be a part of what we're doing here at the MCC. So this is a little bit about myself. I usually put this slide up just to give you a perspective of where I come from as both chair of the Massachusetts Coastal Coalition and flood specialist at Rogers Gray Insurance, along with all the other pieces of what I do. The reason that I mention this is to give everybody a perspective that we're looking at a map change both from the community perspective and the insurance options and how it affects you, the individual, because the insurance implications obviously hit your pocket the most out of all the changes that happen during a map change. So that's why we're going to be walking through those options as we get towards the end. So let's talk about what's going on in the town of Marshfield with the map change. So what's happening? Marshfield filed a letter of map revision about 2 to 3 years ago in order to update the maps that had changed in November of 2016. So a letter of map revision is FEMA's official modification to a flood map that is effective. So this is not what we would consider a full map revision. That's called a PMR, or a physical map revision, when a whole community gets updated maps. A LOMAR will change portions of existing flood maps. So a LOMAR does not require a town meeting vote. So the town of Marshfield will not be required to go to town meeting to make a vote on the flood maps or the LOMAR. And there are public notices that were published back in February and March. The town then in the middle of March, did a map information, digital map information session. And because a LOMAR officially revises the maps, the flood hazard updates shown are used to rate flood insurance policies, as we'll be talking about later in the presentation. So we are, actually the next slide should tell us that here are some of the impacts specifically to the town of Marshfield with the letter of map revision. So you can see that overall 632 buildings will be coming out of the high-risk flood zone. 1,476 buildings will have their base flood elevations reduced to some degree. 37 buildings will have no change. 106 buildings will have their base flood elevations, or the flood elevation stated on the map, will increase by 2 to 7 feet in height. So there's a range of increases. And 34 buildings will come into the high-risk flood zone for the first time, all of which will be in what we call the AO3 zone, which that is where water sheets across land versus sits or stands. These numbers will vary a little bit. The town put these numbers together. Nobody other than the town completes these numbers, meaning that that FEMA does not tell us this information. It is the responsibility of the community to put these numbers together. So these may vary. I know we have found some buildings that were out that were not counted. So these overall, though, numbers are really going to help give you a perspective on what's happening in the town. So what you can basically overall, about over 2,000 structures will have some impact by the map change. I think that's the most important thing to take away. So in terms of time frames, the LOMAR is not effective until 7/6. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, the LOMAR is not effective until 7/6/2020. And you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, I've put some images of overlays of changes. So in the top picture, you'll see that the lighter color green is where the existing map is, and the darker color green is where it's being pulled back to by the letter of map revision. This is one example. And in the bottom screen, the shaded area is the area that is increasing in flood elevation. So those are the buildings that are being put into the high-risk flood zone for the first time. But none of this is effective until 7/6/2020. So July 6th of this year, the maps become effective. So that means all the insurance information that we're talking about today, none of this is effective or can be done until that day. There is a 90-day appeal period which recently expired, so there's no longer the ability to appeal these maps, which is something that we didn't expect to have happen, but in case it did, that appeal period was open for 90 days. But after the maps do become effective, individuals at any time may apply for a letter of map amendment. And what a LOMA does is it basically shows that the land at the lowest grade against the building is higher than the flood elevation, the base flood elevation, and removes the requirement for flood insurance for that particular building. And you can see there's a link, and all the attendees will be sent this presentation. This is being recorded in order to be put on our website and our Facebook page. So the link in this presentation goes to the Coast to Coalition's newly mapped website or webpage. And from that webpage, you can actually go to and type in, we have an Excel spreadsheet on there on the website where you can type in your address to see what the change is. Now, again, not 90% of addresses are on that list. They're not all on there, but it gives those that are looking for information about a map change a good perspective to see if your building is included in the map change. Again, that's noflood.org/update/new-maps, and you'll see the Excel spreadsheet that is searchable for your building for the change. So if you do have questions around that, you can certainly reach out to us, and we can certainly help identify buildings and what the change may be. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the insurance options during a map change. So really there's 4 basic scenarios for insurance, for flood insurance during a map change. You're either moving into the special flood hazard area, which is any of those A or V zones, shaded zones on the flood maps. So you're either moving into the special flood hazard area, you're coming out of the special flood hazard area, you have a change to your base flood elevation, and you have a change to your flood zone. Now, the last 2 can happen at the same time, but we're going to take each one of those separately. So again, there may be variations of these, but the goal is to get the insured or the constituency of the community to understand the basic changes that are happening with insurance to your structure. So let's take a look at each option. So if you are moving into the special flood hazard area, then the flood policy must be purchased within the first 12 months after the map change, or within 24 months of the map change if the lender notifies you after the 12 months is over. So where we saw this in the 2012 and 2013 map changes, was that the newly mapped policy would give you 12 months to be purchased, but many lender notifications may not have happened well into that 12 months, if not beyond. So we advocated and were able to get the Flood Insurance Advocates Office to actually give an extension to that by saying that if a lender notifies somebody within 24 months, so another 12 months, then they're able to purchase this newly mapped policy. So here is a generalized process for the newly mapped procedure. You'll see a timeline here. And basically what that timeline is saying is before the map effective date, you can get the preferred risk policy at a low rate. Then once the maps become effective, you can still get the preferred risk policy, but it's now what's called the newly mapped policy. But then after that 12-month or 24 months is over, depending on if you're notified by your lender after the first 12 months, you can no longer get this low rate policy. Now, to really summarize the financial impacts to an individual based on this, take a look at the chart below. Basically, we've taken 4 years of insurance rating and shown you options based on the chart above. The first option is if you purchase the policy before the maps even became effective. You get an extra year of the preferred risk policy, and you can see that that saves you a little less than $100 a year in your 4th year. If you purchase after the map becomes effective, but within the 12 or 24 months, then you can see that by year 4, you're still paying a significantly lower rate than the third option, which is if you do nothing. If you are moved into the SFHA and don't do anything, you purchase a policy as if you were never newly mapped, and your rates in year 4 are 3 to 4 times as high. And this is based on an AE zone in this example. So what we're trying to communicate here is if you are moving into the special flood hazard area, be aware of what's going on and make sure that you understand that you should purchase flood insurance within the next 12 months. And even with the 24 months with the lender notification, we would highly suggest not to wait for that lender to notify you and to simply purchase the flood insurance. Okay, so what if you're coming out of the special flood hazard area? This is where we see a lot of concern with people wanting to simply drop their flood insurance policies. Again, in Marshfield, that's about 700 structures are coming out of the special flood hazard area. Again, that's any A or B zone. So if you are coming out of the special flood hazard area, any change that you want to make has to wait. So the first piece is you've got to wait until the effective date of the letter of map revision, which again in Marshfield is 7/6 of 2020. Some lenders will say, hey, we understand that this is happening and we will revise your flood information on our end and allow you to move forward with a cancellation or revision to the policy. But a lot of the times you may have to notify your lender. So you should send them an updated flood zone determination. We do sell them. You can through our flood risk services. You can also get them from your local agent. However you obtain that flood zone determination, you'll want to get one after the map becomes effective. And so it's, again, only after the map is effective, because what it'll show is you've been moved in to a lower risk zone, which is the shaded X or unshaded X zone. Then you really have 2 options after the maps change. You can either convert to what we call the preferred risk policy or the PRP, or you can cancel your flood insurance. Now, we really, and especially because Marshfield has recently increased their community rating system level to 15% discounts, one of the things that we do is track insurance purchases in the town. So we are encouraging people to keep their flood insurance at the new low rate, the preferred risk policy. In order to do it, it's simple. A document showing the revised map, so a picture of the map of where you have been moved to. You have to, the effective date of the revision is the day the map changed, and there is a refund eligible for the current term that you're in. The refund is for the entire current term, which is the difference between the higher rate you may have been paying in the new preferred risk policy rate, which is for primary residences about $600, and for a second home around $700. So really, you're looking to keep a policy at a much lower rate. You want to get a preferred risk policy, which can be easily done by converting your current policy when the maps change. And then, of course, those that do want to cancel their flood insurance, that can be done as well. It's what we call a pro rata refund, which means your refund is from the date of the map change all the way up to the end of your current term. And the cancellation effective date, of course, is the date that the policy, the date that the maps change, but it's also the date the company receives the request and all supporting documentation. So basically, this means don't wait to submit your request to cancel. Do it the day the maps change. And you should consult with your insurance agent for a full overview of the process. Again, this is just giving you an outline of your options. There is obviously more details such as documentation that's required. Your own individual situation may be limited to more, may not be limited to these options. You'll want to consult with your insurance agent. But these are really, this is what happens if you move out of the SFHA, and we really encourage people, again, to convert your policy to a preferred risk policy. Okay, so what if you have a change in the base flood elevation? So that means the flood elevation has either gone up, so the flood zone remains the same with a higher base flood elevation, or the flood zone remains the same with a lower base flood elevation. Either way, your flood policy, if you have one in place currently, can be grandfathered. So if the base flood elevation is going up, then keep your current flood policy in place. If the base flood elevation is going down, then see if the reduction in flood elevation helps your flood insurance premium, and it can be changed, but you don't have to have it changed, and you can remain with the policy in place. And then flood zone and base flood elevations change at the same time. Again, you'll want to review that with your insurance agent, see if the change is beneficial to your rating. And I think what's key in both this slide and the next slide is two things. The first is stated here. In either scenario, it's advised that those that don't currently have a flood policy investigate purchasing one before the flood map change happens in order to become grandfathered, meaning locking into the rate now versus getting charged a higher rate later. And I think the other important thing here is to make sure that you do understand that your individual situation is going to be very important to keep in mind, and to consult with your insurance agent about those options, because the base flood elevation and zone can change at the same time. But it is critical, though, that you investigate, and relatively soon, if a flood insurance policy is going to be beneficial to purchase now ahead of time to be grandfathered based on the map change that is happening. And then, of course, there is a change in zone. You can either move from a lower risk zone to a higher risk zone, or move from a higher risk zone to a lower risk zone. Again, in either case, you can keep your rate. And it's important to note that the flood insurance manual says, basically, in paraphrasing here, that the best rate available is the rate that the insured or the constituent, whoever is looking at making the change insuring the building, the best rate available is the rate that you should be rated by. So if a zone is changing to go higher, you don't have to. If you have a policy in place, you don't have to be rated at the higher zone or the higher flood elevation. You can keep the rate you have if you have a policy in place. And that goes back to the bottom bullet here, which is, in any scenario, it is advised those that do not currently have a flood insurance policy investigate purchasing one before the flood map changes in order to become grandfathered. So this is, I cannot emphasize this enough. Whenever there is a map change, you're going to want to be alerted that there is a map change, and walk through the different scenarios and the best insurance policy options for you, because if you should buy a flood insurance policy before the maps change and you're already in a high-risk flood zone, that could be critical to becoming grandfathered. And if you don't have, we have a lot of people in New England who don't purchase flood insurance because they don't have a mortgage and they're not required to. Now is a time before the maps actually change to start thinking about, okay, what am I going to do here in 10, 15 years? Does a flood insurance policy help me sell my structure? Does it help me lock in a lower rate? These are all things that need to be reviewed with your insurance agent. But again, these are the options that are available to you. So we do have some frequently asked questions that we have put in here that we get fairly often based on a map change. So we'll take them one by one. So why is there a map change happening? Well, in the case of Marshfield, there was a letter of map revision, and the community, meaning the community has asked FEMA to revise the flood maps. Now, if there's map changes not in regards to a letter of map revision, FEMA has a goal of remapping all coastal counties at least once every 5 years. We know that doesn't happen. There are map changes going on right now because FEMA's changing the way they map the country from county boundaries to watershed boundaries. So Marshfield is actually going through a second map change that really has no impact on the community, which is the watershed mapping, and those changes are happening across the country. So those are the reasons that these map changes happen. I don't have an elevation certificate. Should I get one? Well, you may. A change in flood zone can also mean a change in the base flood elevation, and this means an elevation certificate could help your premium. Now, we can certainly help guide you to getting one. And here's something very important. If you get an elevation certificate and it hurts your rate, we don't have to use it. Because remember, the flood insurance manual says that the best rate available is the rate that you are rated by. A elevation certificate that hurts your rating is not used to rate. Do I qualify for a letter of map amendment? So that is the process of removing your individual structure from the requirement of having flood insurance. And it really can only be done if the lowest grade, not your lowest floor, but if the lowest grade around your building is higher than the flood elevation on the map, you may be removed. To do this, an elevation certificate is required. And again, we can help walk you through that. Email our flood service center at floodinsurance@noflood.org. Are there any other options from the National Flood Insurance Program? So flood insurance is getting expensive for a lot of people, but yes, there are options. In the last few years, private flood companies such as Lloyd's of London have become competitive. However, there are risks to leaving the NFIP or not using the National Flood Insurance Program. So you really need to talk to your insurance agent about those options, because what we find is sometimes the National Flood Insurance Program really is the best option, but not always. So please talk to your insurance agent. Why should I care if I become grandfathered? Well, we talked a lot about grandfathering in today's webinar. And why should you care? Because FEMA policies are transferable upon the sale of a property. So again, think about what are you going to be doing with that structure in 5, 10, 15 years? Should you purchase a policy? You know, flood maps typically don't go down in elevation unless something like a letter of map revision is changing a map. So you really should consider purchasing flood insurance if it makes sense to become grandfathered. And you're still not sure what to do, reach out to us. And we're going to talk a little bit about the resources that we have available. So to help communicate options, we have several things that are out there. The Flood Service Center. We do have a Flood Service Center here at the Costa Coalition to answer generalized questions about flood insurance. The Flood Service Center is the flood insurance. Actually, I'll go back here. It's floodinsurance@noflood.org. It goes to a generalized email inbox, and we have a flood specialist that will help answer your questions. Again, we don't really get into policy-specific questions, and if you do, we can help generalize the answer and send you to your insurance agent to complete changes or help guide you through the questions. Again, we're helping to promote the community rating system, and in Marshfield we have a plan for public information which is outreach focused. Well, in theory, if we're doing them digitally now, we're at 4 town events a year, now digital webinars, and we do have the free webinar series. Now, the in-person outreaches, we have several that we still plan on doing, such as being at town meetings, being out in the public. It was just discussed recently that our annual meeting for the Coastal Coalition may actually be held digitally. So we are working on in-person, but again, these free webinar series are going to continue across this year. And that brings me to my next slide. If you do want to continue to be part of these webinars, we have our next one on June 19th. And that one is to, the link is right there and it's not clickable, so I apologize, but I will make sure that this is on our website. And it is. If you go to our events page, you can go to our June 19th webinar, which is COVID-19 is taking most of our bandwidth. So we're going to be talking about how to focus again with some experts, not just myself, and registration is required, how to focus on flood risk. And that is on June 19th. And in July, while we don't have a date yet, we do have a webinar on private flood versus national flood insurance. So that'll be a really good one to talk a little bit about in general, underwriting, how to write between the two worlds, those two worlds. It's going to be industry focused. We're going to try to get a lot of industry folks on this one, and we'll have some experts on our webinar to talk about that. So here's how to contact us. In the chat, if there's any questions, please enter them into your chat right now. And here's how to reach out to us. Again, become a member today right on our website. It's free. And you'll get our updates and newsletters and invites to these webinars. So again, feel free to reach out to us. This is our first webinar, which I hope you've enjoyed. It's been kind of interesting. This is really, we're testing more and more our capabilities. And again, these webinar series, they're half hour once a month and they're free. So please spread the word, get other people on them. We hope to continue to inform you. This one was recorded and will be posted on our website and on our Facebook and LinkedIn pages. And I'll give a few seconds here for any questions. Okay. I don't see any questions coming through, so I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. Again, this will be posted on our website along with all the links. All right, thanks so much, everybody, and we hope to see you at our next webinar.